The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Ada sat stiffly in the defendant's chair. The prosecution painted her as cold, unfeeling, and suspiciously quiet. Every eye in the room seemed glued to her expressionless face. No tears, no trembling hands, no desperate plea for mercy. Just silence. To the onlookers, her silence screamed guilt. If she didn't do it, why won't she speak? A woman in the gallery whispered, echoed by dozens of others. Camera crews captured every still moment of her unflinching gaze, projecting to millions of viewers across the nation. The case was already viral. Headlines read, "Silent Suspect. Woman refuses to testify in teacher's murder." Memes circulated online mocking her stillness. Social media split into two camps, those convinced she was guilty, and those insisting her silence could mean fear, trauma, or strategy. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Miss Ada," he said firmly, "you are allowed to defend yourself. Would you like to say anything to this court?" Ada blinked. The weight of the question hung in the air. For a long, painful moment, she said nothing. Her silence filled the room like confession. The jury exchanged uneasy glances. And just like that, her fate felt sealed, not by evidence, not by witnesses, but by the crushing interpretation of her silence. But Ada's quiet wasn't born of guilt. Deep inside, she carried reasons, raw, buried truths, that no one yet understood. The first chapter ends with a haunting question. What does Ada know that keeps her silent? 2 months earlier, the town of Rosehill was rocked by tragedy. Mrs. Miriam Clark, a beloved high school teacher, was found dead in her home. Known for her kindness and strict but fair nature, Miriam had taught nearly everyone in town, including Ada. The crime scene was brutal but strangely calculated. There were no signs of forced entry. The only unsettling clue was Miriam's phone, still clutched in her hand. The last call she made was at 10:34 p.m. The recipient? Ada. Detectives swarmed Ada's small apartment that same night. She looked confused, half asleep when they knocked. But the discovery of her number as the last call sent alarm bells blaring. She was the last person Miriam tried to reach. The lead detective announced at a press conference, "We need answers." The town quickly supplied its own. Rumors filled coffee shops and grocery store aisles. Why had Miriam called Ada? What did Ada know? Why was she silent? The narrative took shape fast. Ada had something to hide. And in a community where everyone knew everyone, the suspicion burned hotter than wildfire. The tabloid began digging into Ada's life. On the surface, she was ordinary, an assistant librarian, quiet, solitary, and often overlooked. But the press found cracks. She had financial struggles, debts piling up. Miriam had once mentored Ada, but recently tensions had grown between them. Students recalled overhearing raised voices when Ada visited the school. Someone whispered that Miriam threatened to expose a dark secret. Theories spread online. Jealousy? Revenge? Money? Even Ada's own co-workers noticed her withdrawn demeanor. One colleague said, "She kept to herself. I always thought something was off about her." The prosecution spun this perfectly. A young woman with a grudge, a troubled past, and a victim who stood in her way. By now, Ada wasn't just a suspect. She was a villain in a story the world wanted to watch. The interrogation tapes went viral. Detectives sat across from Ada, their voices sharp, their tone insistent. "Why did Miriam call you? Where were you that night? Why won't you just answer us?" Ada sat quietly, staring at her folded hands. Her lips pressed tight. Every silence seemed like an admission. The detectives grew frustrated. One slammed his hand on the table. "You're making yourself look guilty," he barked. But Ada didn't flinch. Psychologists later debated her silence on talk shows. Some said it was guilt. Others said it was trauma. A few suggested it was a survival tactic. Ada had learned long ago that speaking could be dangerous. But without her words, the police filled the silence with their own version of truth. And it was damning. By the time Ada appeared in court for the first time, her silence had already been weaponized. The prosecution hammered at it. Innocent people speak. Guilty ones hide. The defense faltered, unable to explain why their client refused to open her mouth. The media took the silence and ran. News anchors declared her lack of defense chilling. Commentators said it reeked of arrogance. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs, "Speak UP, Ada, and silence equals guilt." Inside, Ada sat quietly, eyes lowered, bearing the weight of the world judgment. But what no one yet knew was this: her silence wasn't surrender. It was protection. Protection for herself. Protection for someone else. Protection for a truth too dangerous to voice, at least not yet. The cliffhanger question: what secret is Ada protecting with her silence? When the prosecution's case began looking thin, attention shifted to Ada's closest friend, Kyoma, a college mate who had known her for nearly a decade. Kyoma was subpoenaed, reluctantly stepping into the spotlight. On the stand, her voice trembled. "Ada's always been complicated," she said. "Quiet, but carrying something heavy. She never told me everything, but sometimes, late at night, she'd call me crying. Once, she mentioned Miriam's name. She said, if she tells them, everything's over." The courtroom gasped. Those words sounded like a threat, like motive. Social media erupted again. Proof Ada feared exposure. But the defense dug deeper. Kyoma admitted under cross-examination that Ada had also said, "Miriam is the only one who really understood me." Her testimony became a double-edged sword, painting Ada as secretive, but also deeply loyal. Outside court, reporters swarmed Kyoma, twisting her words to headlines. "Best friend confirms murder suspect's fear," one tabloid screamed. Yet the truth was far murkier. Kyoma didn't know if Ada was guilty, but she knew Ada's silence was rooted in pain. And that pain had a story yet untold. The state wasted no time crafting a compelling narrative. The prosecutor, sharp and theatrical, laid out the case like a script designed for television. Miriam Clark discovered Ada's secret. He told the jury. That secret gave Ada motive. On the night of the murder, Miriam called Ada, her final attempt to confront her. Minutes later, Miriam was dead. And Ada? Silent. Silent when asked by police. Silent here in this courtroom. Because silence is easier than lies. He painted Ada as a woman driven by desperation, who silenced a mentor to protect herself. He highlighted her financial struggles, her arguments with Miriam, and her refusal to explain her whereabouts. To the jury, it looked airtight. To the media, it was a perfect villain story, a troubled young woman who turned on the one person trying to help her. But in truth, the prosecution story was stitched together with assumptions and whispers, not hard proof. Still, in a courtroom where silence screamed louder than evidence, it was more than enough to sway hearts. Ada's legal team struggled under the weight of her silence. Her lead attorney, Mr. Bello, was seasoned but visibly frustrated. "Help me help you," he whispered to her before hearings, but Ada only lowered her eyes. In court, his defense crumbled. With no testimony from Ada, no witnesses willing to vouch for her whereabouts, and no clear motive to counter the state's theory, Bello looked powerless. He tried to argue lack of physical evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon linking Ada directly to crime. But the prosecution counted, because she was careful, because he planned it. The jury seemed unconvinced by Bello's words. They wanted a story as strong as the prosecution's, and he couldn't deliver it without his client's voice. Behind the scenes, Bello pleaded with Ada, "If you don't speak, they will bury you. Why are you protecting silence more than your own life?" But Ada stayed quiet, gripping a small pendant around her neck. Whatever truth she was protecting, it was bigger than her freedom. Just as the case seemed to tilt irrevocably against Ada, the defense stumbled on a thread of hope. Miriam's phone record showed that the final call lasted exactly 34 seconds, oddly short for what should have been a confrontation. Even stranger, Ada's cell tower pings placed her across town during that call, at least according to initial data. But there was a problem. A secondary log suggested her phone may have been near Miriam's neighborhood an hour earlier. Confusion set in. Was Ada there before the murder? Did she leave, only to receive Miriam's call later? Tech experts debated. One argued that tower data wasn't always precise. Another suggested someone could have used Ada's phone without her knowing. The jury, however, only heard fragments. Enough to sow doubt, but not enough to exonerate. Yet for the defense, this was a crack in the wall. If they could unravel the phone records, they might unravel the entire prosecution's case. As the trial stretched on, journalists began investigating Ada's past. What they uncovered cast a silence in a new, haunting light. Ada had grown up in a household of secrets. Her father was abusive, her mother silent, her siblings scattered. From a young age, Ada learned that speaking out only brought pain. Silence became her armor. At 16, she confided in Miriam, her teacher, who became her safe place. Miriam knew more about Ada's struggles than anyone else. But when Miriam threatened to reveal something Ada wanted buried, old fears resurfaced. Flashbacks painted Ada not as a monster, but as a survivor, someone conditioned to believe that silence equaled survival. Psychologists interviewed by the media reframed the narrative. Her silence may not be guilt, it may be trauma. But the public wasn't sure what to believe. Was Ada a victim of a past, or was her silence still hiding something darker? The cliffhanger now sharpened. What truth did Miriam hold that could destroy Ada, and why was Ada so terrified to let it out? Just when the prosecution looked untouchable, the defense got its first real break. A key witness, Mrs. Halima, had testified with confidence that she saw Ada near Miriam's home the night of the murder. She claimed Ada walked briskly down the street just minutes before neighbors heard screams. But under cross-examination, cracks appeared. "How close were you?" Bello, Ada's attorney, asked. "Across the street," she said. "At night? Were the streetlights out that evening?" Her lips quivered. "Well, yes, but I know Ada. I recognize her walk." The courtroom murmured. Recognizing someone's walk in the dark suddenly felt flimsy. When Bello pressed further, Halima admitted she had been distracted, carrying groceries, fumbling with her keys. The doubt was enough. Reporters seized on the inconsistency. Headlines read, "Eyewitness in Ada's case not so certain after all." The jury shifted uneasily. If one detail of the prosecution's story was shaky, what else might crumble under scrutiny? Then came the discovery that changed everything. A local shop owner handed over grainy surveillance footage from the night of the murder. The timestamp, 10:40 p.m., just 6 minutes after Miriam's final call. The footage showed Ada walking out of the shop, holding a grocery bag. This contradicted the timeline entirely. If Ada was at the store, she couldn't have been at Miriam's house at the same time. But there was a catch. The footage was blurry. The figure resembled Ada, same height, same build, even the same jacket she often wore. But the face? Obscured by shadows. The prosecution pounced. That could be anyone, they argued. Shadows deceive. Clothing can be copied. Still, the footage planted serious doubt. If the defense could prove the person was indeed Ada, the timeline would unravel, and the entire case against her would collapse. The question became, was this blurry figure Ada, or a phantom of convenience? The courtroom had barely settled after the camera revelation when a shockwave hit. A man named Daniel, soft-spoken and hesitant, came forward. He was a delivery driver, and on the night of the murder, he swore he had delivered groceries to Ada's apartment at 10:35 p.m. The receipt matched his claim. His delivery log showed Ada signed for the order just minutes after Miriam's call. The rumor erupted. If true, Daniel's testimony placed Ada across town at the exact time prosecutors claimed she was killing Miriam. The prosecution attacked. Why wait so long to come forward? Daniel lowered his eyes. "I didn't think it mattered. But when I saw her on the news, I realized it did." Suddenly, Ada's silence looked less like guilt and more like faith. Faith that the truth would surface, even if she couldn't speak it herself. But why couldn't she speak? That mystery still gnawed at everyone watching. With Daniel's testimony, the trial shifted. For the first time, the defense had a story as compelling as the prosecution's. But the battle was far from over. The prosecution tore into Daniel's credibility. They questioned his eyesight, his memory, his motives. Are you sure it was Ada who signed that receipt? Or could someone else in her home have done it? Daniel stood firm. It was her. I remember because she thanked me. She seemed scared, shaken, like she'd just gotten bad news. The jury sat in silence, weighing every word. Was this the truth, or just another performance? Meanwhile, Social media exploded. Some hailed Daniel as Ada's savior. Others accused him of lying for attention. Viral hashtags clashed. #free Ada versus #silent killer. The courtroom was no longer just about evidence. It was a war between truth and perception, where the loudest narrative risked drowning out reality. Then came the twist no one expected. As investigators re-examined Miriam's phone, they discovered dozens of messages with another name, Mr. Oho, a colleague at the school. Their exchanges hinted at jealousy, betrayal, and confrontation. One message, just a day before Miriam's death, stood out. "If you tell anyone, you'll regret it." Suddenly, suspicion shifted. Could Oho have had more motive than Ada? He worked closely with Miriam, had been at her house before, and had reason to silence her permanently. The defense seized the opportunity. Why was this man never investigated? Why was Ada the easy target? Below thundered in court. The jury leaned forward, intrigued. For the first time, Ada's silence seemed almost justified. The new cliffhanger burned through every headline. Did the wrong person stand trial? When suspicion shifted from Ada to Mr. Oho, the world turned upside down. The same reporters who once condemned Ada scrambled to rewrite their stories. News anchors began their segments with hesitant apologies. Perhaps we judged too quickly. But the damage was done. Ada had already been painted as a monster. On social media, the tone shifted violently. Some said, "We owe her an apology." Others mocked, "Too late, she's still guilty by silence." Outside the courthouse, protesters returned, this time with signs that read, "Investigate Oho," and "Justice of Miriam." Inside, Oho was brought in for questioning. He looked calm, almost smug, but his body language betrayed him. When asked about the threatening texts, he stuttered. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, his story wavered. For Ada, it was vindication, but also torment. Even if Oho was guilty, would the world ever see her as innocent? Then, for the first time since her arrest, Ada broke her silence. It happened during cross-examination, when the prosecutor sneered, "If you're so innocent, why haven't you said a single word?" Ada's lips trembled. She clutched her pendant. And then, in a voice raspy from months of silence, she spoke. "Because every time I spoke the truth in my life, someone tried to bury me. Miriam told me she was going to help me, but when she said she might reveal my past, I panicked. Not because I killed her, but because I thought I'd lose the only person who ever protected me. That night, she called me. I couldn't answer. And then, she was gone." The courtroom froze. Tears welled in Ada's eyes as she continued. "I didn't kill Miriam. I loved her like a mother. I stayed silent because the truth has never kept me safe. But now, I have nothing left to lose." Her words landed like thunder. For the first time, the jury saw not a cold suspect, but a broken survivor. The jury deliberated for 20 grueling hours. Every second felt like a century. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, live-streaming updates. Viewers around the world waited with bated breath. Finally, the jury filed back in. The four-person stood, voice steady but solemn. "On the charge of murder, we find the defendant, Ada, not guilty." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ada collapsed into her lawyer's arms, sobbing silently. Across the aisle, Oho shifted uncomfortably, his name now whispered as a true villain. But the victory was bittersweet. Ada had been freed, but the world had already judged her. Her reputation was shattered, her life forever scarred. Outside, the crowd was split, half cheering, half shouting accusations. To some, she was vindicated. To others, she would always be the silent suspect. In the weeks that followed, Ada tried to rebuild her life. But everywhere she went, whispers followed. Strangers stared. Employers hesitated. Even old friends kept their distance. She gave one interview, just one. Sitting across from a journalist, she explained her silence, her past, and her love for Miriam. The clip went viral, racking millions of views in hours. For the first time, people saw her as human, not headline fodder. Meanwhile, investigators reopened the case against Oho. Evidence mounted. His texts, his timeline, his lies. Slowly, the town realized Ada had been a victim twice. First a suspicion, then a betrayal. Still, Ada lived in the shadow of the trial. She learned that freedom and innocence weren't the same thing. The series closes on Ada standing at Miriam's grave, a bouquet of lilies in her hand. She whispers, voice trembling, "I stayed silent because I was afraid, but your truth set me free, and now I'll never let silence define me again." She walks away as the camera lingers on the grave, the carved words glowing in the fading light. "Beloved teacher, truth never dies." The narrator's voice cuts in. Her silence looked like guilt. The world condemned her for it. But when the truth finally spoke, it revealed not a killer, but a survivor. In the end, her silence wasn't the sound of guilt. It was the sound of survival. The screen fades to black. The final words appear. Would you have judged her guilty too?